Good morning, world history. We're starting into a new unit as we got into a little bit last week, and I wanted to walk through one of the assignments and a few of the supports that I've put in place. So just feel free to use anything that I go over in this video for your own good, and we will go ahead and get started. So I want to point out a few things. First off, you can see our Google Classroom here. I have our classwork, and I put a few things on here. The first thing is, if you remember that compelling and supporting questions Google slide, and I'm really going to ask you guys to keep up with this, and I'm going to give you time in class every day to add something to this. But the goal is to be working through this for the entire unit. So make sure that just whenever we have the time in class, to put some stuff in here that you go ahead and do that, because the purpose is this is a long unit, and so you want to be filling this out as we go as opposed to having to go back. So we're going to be working on supporting question 1 is what economic needs drove international trade from 1300 to 1750. And for this question you're just going to make a list on this side, and I have one up here, and you'll see what that's going to look like. But you're going to make just a list of the needs that encourage people to trade based on what we looked at and read. So keep that in mind. And also what I've posted is a word wall, and I'm going to keep this as a live document. And I'm going to keep adding to it as you guys come up with some things that maybe you don't understand or need help with. But this will always be available for you to look at. So like, for example, you're gonna hear this term, the Silk Roads, a lot. It's not gonna be today, but you're gonna hear this term, the Silk Roads, which is basically, when I get to it, I'll explain a little bit more, but it's a network of trade that, there are these routes and roads that connected Eastern Europe, North Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and then East Asia and China. And they were thousands of miles long. And this is the roads that the traders and merchants went along. And then similarly in North Africa, that across the Sahara Desert, there was what was called the Sand Roads, which is a network of trade that connected much of West, North, and East Africa across the Sahara Desert, thus the Sand Roads, the desert. So you're going to hear Silk Roads and Sand Roads a lot in this unit. And then economic. That's one, because it's the question today. Anytime you see the term economic, just think of money. Think of like the way people make and spend money. That's what economics are. So, the simplest form, there's a lot more to it than that, but in its simplest form, the term economic just has to do with money. So if you hear that, just think money, and I can't stress that enough. So that's a few definitions. Now, what we're going to get into today is, again, knowing what the compelling question for the unit is. Does trade make people better off? And we have that idea of trade, which is just basically people who would, they would buy and sell goods from one country and bring them to another country that couldn't get those goods normally. And that's how people got rich. This is like, you go to get something from China and then sell it somewhere in Europe where you couldn't normally get that good, and you make a ton of money doing it. So this idea of trade is just, it's more about like the world being connected. And so we're really going to ask, like, does the connections that trade formed make people better off? So think about that, because we're gonna really connect that to today and like how connected the world is today. But back then it was a lot harder to be connected. So does trade make people better off? And then what economic needs drove international trade during this time period that we're starting 1300 to 1750? So again, what economic needs? Basically, like, how did people make money by trading? And so we're going to really look into that today. So if you go to our classroom, go to our classwork, we have this assignment called Economic Needs. It's a Google form. Everything you need is in there. Click on that, and I'm going to walk you through the first part of it and show you what the rest could look like, and then I will set everyone to work. So we're going to look at a few documents based on that first supporting question of like what economic needs drove trade. So obviously put your name. I need to know who you are. First and last, preferably, because I have multiple people with the same first name in every class, and I need to know who you are. So this is just to get you kind of warmed up. What's an example of an economic need nowadays? What are some economic needs that people have? So just think about that. Give a something that you know that people want, or like the way people make money. So, and then back throughout history, trade meant exchanging goods in one country for things that you couldn't get. So, and again, I want you to think about like, what does that look like today? What's an example of trade in the world today? How do people like get things from one country to another that you can't get? Because there's lots of things that, like, let's say that we can't grow in the United States, but we still have those things. Or, there's some things we can't grow in Kentucky, but we still have those things because they get grown in other parts of the country. All right, so what we're going to look at, we're going to start in West Africa. And no, Africa, the continent of Africa, West Africa is a part of that continent, and there's many countries within West Africa. But we're going to look at empires that existed. We're going to look at what was called the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, their emperor Mansa Musa, and then we're going to start to look into like how the Europeans started making contact with those people. So the Mali Empire, just for a little bit of background, extended across a lot of West Africa, and they were super rich. And that's the best way I can put it. They were super rich because if this is the Mali Empire, these gold things are gold mines, and that's where you get gold. You get it out of the ground in a mine. People have to dig for it, right? So there were some, and it doesn't look very big on the map, but if you know how huge Africa is, this is a lot of gold. And then there was some a little bit outside of their territory as well. They had tons of gold, and they would display it. People who came into their cities, would see just this gold everywhere, and they'd be like, "Wow, this is a very powerful and rich nation, and rich leaders and very impressive people." So people are always very impressed to come into their cities, especially the city called Timbuktu, which you've probably heard of, but didn't know where it was. Well, there it is, right here on the map. So, here's a picture. This guy named Mansa Musa, and he was the emperor. He was like the leader of the Mali Empire, and he would, like, if he would go places, he would go like on this big throne of gold, and he'd wear a gold crown, and everything around him would be made of gold just to show off that wealth. And people were, again, he's been called the richest person in the history of the world because of all the gold that he would display. So I'll give you this one right here, and I almost want to see this word for word in some of your answers. What was something the Mali Empire had that made them important to other nations? Well, you can put it right here. Lots of gold. Pretty simple stuff, right? Lots of gold. So then the next question, how do you think emperors like Mansa Musa, who's this guy, how do you use this to make himself look more important and powerful to other people and to their own people? So think about that. Like, how did he use all of that gold to make himself look more powerful and important? And I kind of explained that, but think about what that could mean. Now, the next question you have to really put some critical thought into. And I'm not going to give you the answer here. I really want you to think about what this means, because this picture was drawn by a guy from Spain, part of Europe. He never met Mansa Musa. He's never laid his eyes on him. Never seen him. He's heard a few descriptions. That's about it. But this picture was drawn by a person who never met the guy. I want you to think about how that might affect the way that artist, that map maker, because he was a map maker and he drew this picture on a map. How might the fact that he never met Mansa Musa, how could that affect the way he drew him? So think about that, because it's going to have a major impact versus someone who actually witnessed or saw him. And then how do you think that this picture, drawn by a guy who never saw him, how's that going to lead Europeans to want to trade with people like him? So just think about that. So, and I keep putting these words like might or how do you think or whatever. I mean, that's a way of me saying like there's no right or wrong answers here. Or there's no wrong answers, I should say. There are right answers. But just put your best thought into this. That's why I don't want to see I don't know. Just put some thought into it, and know that as long as you have some evidence to back it up, you're not going to be wrong. All right, so next, just a short, like 3-paragraph reading. It looks like a lot, but I know I cut this in half from what it originally was. And what it is It's what followed. So the Mali Empire, they existed in West Africa for a few hundred years, and then they started losing their power and influence, some bad leadership, some bad decisions, and they were overrun by what was called the Songhai Empire, um, who lived in that same area. They were actually a little bit bigger. And so you have the Songhai Empire. They used that gold the same way the Mali Empire did, and started trading with other countries, including Portugal, which, so here's West Africa. Here's like where the Mali and Songhai were. Portugal is right in here, this country right here. So they started trading with Portugal, who kind of started, sailing over into West Africa and, setting up trading posts right on the coast. So again, you've probably gathered this, so I'm not going to give the answer. What's one resources everyone seemed to want in West Africa? And then looking at this map and what you read here, because you want to base some stuff on this reading. Why do you think the Europeans were willing and excited to trade with West African gold? Because I'll tell you this right now, like gold by itself is just a rock. So think about like why was that valuable to Europeans? And then the last question is kind of getting you back to that unit question. Does trade make people better off? I want you to think like, do you think, that means no wrong answer. Do you think that gold and trading for gold and like that connection between like the Europeans and the West Africans and like the super rich West Africans and the Europeans who were coming down to try to take advantage of like all that gold that existed? Do you think that the gold and trading for gold made the lives of Africans and Europeans better? And tell me why. Don't just put yes or no. Just give me a quick 1-sentence explanation why. When you're done with that, hit submit. And then the last thing I would encourage you to do is go back to this right here, supporting question 1. What economic needs drove international trade from 1300 to 1750? And obviously you can put gold, but put just, a couple bullet points of like specifically, how did, and I'm not going to put the answer, but put something like tell me how West Africans and Europeans traded for gold and made money off of it. Just put a couple bullet points that tell me like how they made money trading for gold. Because I want you to keep this document up to date. And like I said, I'll give time in class every time that we have something we can put in there. But yeah, that's all I have for this lesson. But please make sure you're getting this done. And as always, if you have questions, reach out to me, and I'm always here to help. So that's all I've got, and I will see everyone next class.